Welcome to meeting number 62 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance, and pursuant to the House Order of Reference adopted on Wednesday, June 22nd, 2022, the committee's meeting to discuss Bill C-228, an act to amend the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act, the Companies Creditors Arrangement Act, and the Pension Benefits Act, Standards Act, 1985. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and the members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. Members, before we move on to the election of the vice chair, on our collective behalf from the Finance Committee, we would like to thank and take this opportunity to pay our respects and tribute to our friend and former colleague, the late Honourable Bill Blakey, our friend MP Daniel Blakey's father. The speeches in the House today were truly moving. We're with you, Daniel, in honoring and celebrating your father today. Also, members, I do recognize that during our last meeting, we had to end abruptly, cutting short MP Blakey's time, owing to House resource constraints. As a mutual moment of courtesy, on our behalf, I'd like to allow MP Blakey the 2+ minutes of his remaining time. MP Blakey, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that on both counts, Mr. Chair. You may recall in that time I had moved a motion in respect of how to dispense with Bill C-228. It's a little bit stale given that we're hearing from witnesses today, which is wonderful. I'm very glad to have them here. But I wonder if I might have unanimous consent to the committee to replace that motion that was on the table with the following, and perhaps we could pass it swiftly. That the committee dedicate the meetings of October 24th and 26th to pre-budget consultation hearings and dispense with clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-228 on Monday, October 31st. Okay. I'm happy to motivate that if you like, okay. Mr. Chair, but I think it speaks for itself in the context of last day's discussion. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But if folks around the table are comfortable with that, then we could perhaps proceed to the decision.
Yeah, thank you, MP Blakey. I am looking around the room and I'm seeing the nodding of heads. Everybody, we have UC, so unanimous consent. Thank you for that. Thank you. So now, members, we're moving to the election of the vice chair. We have a vacancy in the vice chair position. The clerk will now preside over the election of our new vice chair.
Pursuant to the Standing Order 1062, the first vice chair must be a member of the official opposition. I'm not prepared to receive the motions for the first vice chair.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm honored to actually nominate my friend Jajraj Singh Halan for the vice chair position.
Thank you, MP Morantz.
It has been moved by Mr. Martin Morantz that Mr. Jajraj Singh Halan being elected as the first vice chair of the committee. Are there any further motions? Is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt the motion?
Oui.
I declare the motion carried and Mr. Halan duly elected first vice chair of the committee.
Congratulations, Vice Chair MP Halan. Yeah. Would you like to say a few words? No? Okay. Okay, well, that's great. Now we are going to...
Monsieur le Président, appel au
Monsieur.
Yes, MP Semari.
I'd like to propose a motion myself for the further works on the bill. I would like to present a motion. Can you hear me now, Mr. Chair? So the clerk has sent you a motion by email that I'd like to introduce. If you need the time to look at it, discuss it, understand it, I don't think it's very problematic. It's very, very clear that for the study of Bill C-228, in the spirit of concision and efficiency, the committee consider all the evidence and documents gathered by the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology during the second session of the 43rd Parliament as part of its study on Bill C-253. You will recall it's about the same subject. Fundamentally, the Industry Committee studied this quite closely, and we should perhaps not lose all that valuable work that they've done for 253 and apply it to 228. Thank you very much, MP Samari.
To move to our study and the witnesses that. Oh, so we have to put. Yes, members. So the agreement to the motion that was put forward. Yes. Okay. I see all agreement. We have agreement. Okay. Thank you, MP Samari. MP Lawrence.
Mr. Chair, if you could indulge me, I was just wondering if we could quickly just, as I believe has been agreed upon all the parties, just to approve Mr. Chambers' motion on the luxury tax. I just think it's a bit of housekeeping that's been hanging out there for a while. I believe all the parties have agreed to it.
Yes, MP Lawrence, thank you. So this is on Mr. Chambers. I think he had some amendments to the luxury tax. So I'm looking to the members in terms of agreement. Members in agreement? Yes.
Mr. Chair, I believe that it was amended. Are we able to read out what we have just to make sure that we are agreeing to what was amended? Is that okay?
Everybody's received it, right? It's been distributed. Yeah. I do not have it before me. Yes, please, clerk.
Okay, I'll read it. I'll read it in English. That with regard to implementation of Part 4, in parentheses, the Select Luxury Items Tax of Bill C-19, an act to amend implementation certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on April 7, 2022, and other measures, the Department of Finance provide the following to the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. On or before March 1st, 2023, the Department of Finance provide a detailed written economic impact study on the implementation of the Select Luxury Item Tax Act, the tax, in brackets, including a breakdown of the expected impact on employment and expected tax revenue for each asset class. The aforementioned study should also provide an estimate on the total number of items, dollars and units, in brackets, affected by the new tax, in brackets, by asset class, compared to the previous 3 years. Second point, on or before December 9th, the Department of Finance provide a detailed written progress report on efforts by the Department of Finance to address issues with the implementation of the Select Luxury Items Tax Act, including a summary of discussions and issues raised by impacted sectors. Additionally, by December 16th, the Department of Finance appear before the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance for 1 hour to discuss the implementation of Select Luxury Items Tax Act, which appearance should occur after the interim report has been tabled.
Right motion.
Okay. Yes. So members, I'm looking again for approval. Yes. Okay. It's carried. Now we are going to move to our witnesses. Members, just so I get it right this time, on the timing, we have till 7 o'clock, clerk, yes? Resources have us here till 7 o'clock. So I'd now like to welcome our witnesses, and with us today we have the Association of Canadian Pension Management, Andrea Bochter, who's a partner chair, pensions and benefits at Osler LLP. We've got Russ Dunlop, he's the executive vice president of Element Consulting Group. Rick Marrero, who's the chief executive officer at the Association of Canadian Pension Management, and with us from the Canadian Association of Retired Persons, Bill Van Gorder, who's the chief operating officer and chief policy officer. That's what I've got on here. Okay, we've got another list here. So this is okay, and so let's from the Canadian Yes, that's what I have here from the Canadian. Did you say that that Mr. Van Gorder is not with us?
No, he is.
He is.
He is online.
Yeah. Oh, he's on. Okay, yeah. So from the Canadian Association of Retired Persons, again, Bill Van Gorder, welcome. From the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Alex Gray, Senior Director of Fiscal and Financial Services Policy. From the Canadian Federation of Pensioners, we have Michael Powell, who's the President. From the Canadian Labour Congress, we have Soban Vipond, who is the Executive Vice President, and Chris Roberts, Director of Social and Economic Policy. And from United Steelworkers, I'm not sure if we have the United Steelworkers. I see a cross here. Is that they are here? They are. Okay. United Steelworkers. We've got Nicholas Lapierre, who's the area coordinator for the United Steelworkers. Welcome to all our witnesses. And now we'll have an opportunity to hear remarks from our witnesses from the Association of Canadian Pension Management. First, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee for allowing us to get our point across, and we'll just keep it very brief here. I've been with ACPM since 2012. I spent the last 30 years in national senior management in charitable and private sectors. We are a politically neutral, nonprofit national organization. Our membership contains many of the largest DB plans in Canada. Our private and public sector members together manage plans totaling trillions of dollars and millions of plan members. I'd like to introduce my volunteer colleagues. Ross Dunlop, Executive Vice President of Element Consulting Group. Ross is a pension actuary and investment consultant with over 30 years providing advice to pension plan sponsors and trustees. He has experience winding up pension plans, pension plan provision design, investment strategy design, and assisting clients hiring and terminating investment managers. He's a past president of ACPM and has been an ACPM board member for over 10 years. Andrea Bochter is a partner and the national chair of the Pension and Benefits Group at Osler, Hoskin and Harcourt LLP. She's practiced in pensions and benefits law for the past 20 years. Practice has included all types of stakeholders, including debtors, creditors, monitors, receivers, and wind-up plan administrators appointed by pension regulators. She's taught pension law at Queen's University and pension and insolvency law at the University of Toronto and Osgood Professional Development. She's a past chair and current member of the ACPM Federal Council, which deals with federally regulated plans. I would like now to turn it over to Ross Dunlop.
Thank you, Rick, and good afternoon, everybody. There's no other organization in Canada that's done more work at promoting retirement security for plan members, while at the same time creating an environment where plan sponsors continue to offer pension plans than ACPM. ACPM clearly understands the unfortunate situation when a plan sponsor fails and that plan members might not receive 100% of their benefit entitlement. Providing secure benefits to plan members is something that ACPM has been working on for decades. ACPM believes that DB pension plans are a very valuable benefit to plan members, but we need to recognize that employers choose voluntarily to create and support these plans. Pension plan coverage has declined in Canada, particularly defined benefit, fairly precipitously over the last number of years. Going back 20 years, the public sector DB plan membership in Canada from StatsCan is about 82%. 20 years ago, it's 82% today. 20 years ago, private sector DB plans was about 21%. Currently, it's around 9%. So it's the 9% we're talking about today, and that's the worry of ACPM, is the deterioration of the 9. Our specific concerns relate to the fact that employers need credit and loans to operate, and that banks and bondholders will not lend or charge significantly higher interest rates if they're subordinate to pension plans. This will incent board CEOs and CFOs to terminate pension plans that are subject to this legislation. Even those employers that would never find themselves in a bankruptcy situation will be incented to terminate these plans, wind them up. So although Bill C-228, with an admirable goal, gives priority to plan members in the event of a bankruptcy, what we believe will happen is plans will be terminated, and this Bill C-228 would apply to very few plans because those plans will have been wound up. So at this point, I'm going to hand things over to my colleague, Andrea Bochter.
Thanks, Ross. Our goal in appearing before you today is to share with you other options that can help this committee achieve its important goal, but without sacrificing that 9% or about 1.2 million private sector workers in Canada who are presently accruing defined benefit pensions. The pension industry has evolved in the last many years. We have tools in our toolbox to enhance pension security without resorting to a super priority. In my experience, where pensions have been cut after an employer insolvency, the cause of the cut is not that there's not enough money to provide the pension. The cause is the way we wind up pension plans in Canada. We immediately buy annuities from an insurance company to replicate the pension benefit. Annuities are fully guaranteed, but they are backed by low-yielding assets and are therefore expensive relative to other options. In our materials, we outline solutions that parliamentarians could instead consider. They are based on real, recent examples of Canadian successes. For example, allowing for the appointment of a special pensions insolvency trustee to manage or merge pension assets and liabilities, based in part on the Stelco model, where pensioners received 100% of their pension, notwithstanding a large wind-up deficit when the company filed for CCAA protection. Or asset pooling based on the great success of the model deployed in Quebec for members of insolvent company pension plans, or variable and advanced life annuities, new tools recently added to the Income Tax Act. These solutions do more with the dollars that are there than simply rush to buy an annuity and crystallize a deficit, and none would disadvantage the 9% of private sector employees still covered by a defined benefit pension plan in Canada. The committee is nevertheless committed to a super priority approach. We've made a number of suggestions in our materials to lessen the blow this bill will levy against existing defined benefit plans, as well as a number of technical comments, which we are happy to speak to.
Opening remarks, and now we'll hear from the Canadian Association of Retired Persons, CARP. And we have Bill Van Gorder with us.
We do, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for this opportunity to speak to you today on Bill 228. My name is Bill Van Gorder. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of CARP, also known as the Canadian Association of Retired Persons. We're a national, nonpartisan, not-for-profit organization that advocates for financial security, protection from ageism, and improved health care for Canadians as we age. We have over 330,000 paid members in 30 chapters across Canada. CARP seeks to play an active role in creation of policy and legislation that impacts older Canadians. CARP advocates on behalf of older Canadians with all levels of government and collaborates with other organizations on health, ageism, housing, and the financial issues such as we are on this issue today. You know, CARP has been fighting for protection against pensioners for over 20 years. When we created the Nova Scotia chapter of CARP that I was involved in 20 years ago, one of our first planks in our policy platform was this issue. Our first board of directors had members of the Air Canada Pensioners Associations whose life had been severely impacted by the Air Canada insolvency at that time. Pension protection continues to be one of CARP's 7 advocacy priorities still in 2022-23. You know, we're 330,000 paid members of CARP across Canada, and we survey them on a regular basis. And their financial security continues to be their number one concern. They're all concerned about health, as all of us are, but certainly their number one concern is whether or not they're going to have enough money to live on for the rest of their lives. Seniors are anxious, so they're just not going to be able to do that. And frankly, our members can't believe that after 20 years of advocacy, the current legislation allows the assets of a bankrupt or insolvency company to be divided among other secure creditors, such as banks, the CRA, and others, but doesn't move pensioners closer to the front of the line, improving their likelihood of receiving their full pension. A pension they've earned and planned for throughout their working careers. These aren't gifts or unearned benefits, but deferred wages earned by Canadians while they work and payable to them when they retire. The changes that have been made in the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act and the Company Creditors Arrangement Act back in 2018 weren't enough. The current law is still unfair to older Canadians. Inflation is anywhere from 5 to 7%. Food prices alone are up as much as 30%. The inequities across the country have to be addressed, and they have to be addressed now. Changes that should have been made 20 years ago. Older Canadians are demanding action now. You know, if you're 80 years old and people tell you you have to wait 3 or 4 years for something to happen, that just doesn't wash. Now, CARP recommends actions that would protect pension investments, insurance policies, and ensure 100% of pension liabilities and protection of seniors by amending the Act to give pensioners priority status. Now, I'm not going to take your time in repeating the content of the letter that we and the other pensioners and seniors organizations sent you on September 21st. And I have other more expert people in finance who are going to speak later from our group. But CARP does want to emphasize that changes in Canada's laws must give underfunded pensions priority over large creditors and halt the payout of executive bonuses and bankruptcies and insolvency issues. The Air Canada example, Sears in 2017, Nortel in 2009, those cases are strikingly unfortunate examples how tens of thousands of retirees are treated in bankruptcy and insolvency. These proceedings compared to secured financial lenders such as banks and bondholders and other stakeholders. Protection of the financial security of older Canadian workers should be the absolute priority of this committee and the Parliament of Canada. Thank you on behalf of the thousands of CARP members across the country who are looking for action today.
Thank you, Mr. Van Gorder. And, we just heard from a number of our witnesses virtually, and it's great that we're able to do that, and people can come to us from many different locales. Before us here in the House, we have now the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. We have Mr. Alex Gray, who's going to have opening remarks for his organization.
Good evening, and thank you for having me. I appreciate having the opportunity to appear before this committee today. Improving retirement security for pension plan members is a laudable goal. Yet as Canadians continue to have concerns about their financial security in retirement, it is essential that Parliament not address this challenge in a manner that would negatively affect Canadian businesses, especially those that sponsor DB plans. The legislative mechanisms proposed in Bill C-228 would impose material and adverse consequences on Canadian businesses of all sizes. I'll begin by discussing some of these unintended consequences, and to end my remarks, I'll propose solutions which would protect retirement security without burdening the Canadian economy. To start, C-228 would increase the cost of credit for Canadian businesses that offer DB plans. Struggling companies would have greater difficulty securing loans, thereby undermining a core objective of insolvency legislation, to encourage successful restructurings that allow companies to continue employing Canadians, thereby mitigating the social and economic consequences of liquidations. Additionally, DB plan sponsors would reassess continuing to offer DB plans, thereby harming retirement security across the country. As we prepare to enter unquestionably turbulent economic times, I must underscore that economic recovery depends on businesses' ability to access affordable credit so they can invest and grow. C228 would also force lenders to require more collateral and restrict companies' abilities to draw down credit facilities should a pension insolvency come into question. This is because financial institutions ensure systemic stability in part by accurately maintaining prudential regulatory requirements to prevent lending losses. At best, increasing the cost of doing business would impose a competitive disadvantage to Canadian companies which provide DB plans to their employees relative to their non-Canadian competitors. At worst, lenders could refuse to lend to said companies. Additionally, C228 would increase the cost of doing business in Canada by imposing more stringent reporting requirements on companies maintaining DB plans. This is because creditors would face challenges in determining exposure to pension deficiencies. In the end, lenders would find themselves unable to make real-time credit decisions because solvency deficiencies are ultimately forecasts based on factors over which lenders have no control. I believe it would behoove the committee to hear from members of the lending community during this study. I must also stress the consequences of imposing C228 on a timeline shorter than 7 years. Minimizing the fallout for businesses would require considering the length of typical bargaining periods, generally 3 to 5 years, pension plan valuation cycles, generally 3 years, as well as relevant notice periods to plan members on plan reforms, generally 2 years. Those businesses which would need to move to defined contribution pension plans as a result of this legislation would incur significant costs. In such a scenario, DB plan members who are close to retirement would also need a great deal of time to settle with their employers. Additionally, any coming into force date should consider the progress of insolvency proceeding cycles rather than the current approach of being imposed on a particular calendar date. By way of providing constructive solutions to providing retirement income, which would not burden Canadian businesses, which already operate in a time of economic precarity, the Canadian Chamber would encourage amending the BIA and CCAA to allow for the appointment of pension insolvency trustees to wind down insolvent employers' pension plans. Said trustee would have the authority to maximize available pension dollars. This model of success, as has previously been mentioned, has been successfully deployed in Stelco pension plan members' receipt of full pension payments. Another solution the government could study is paving the way for large multi-employer pension plans to subsume smaller pension plans from insolvent companies in order to leverage economies of scale. A pension insolvency trustee could also be empowered to merge insolvent company plans where deemed appropriate. Upsetting the order of priority in insolvencies would impose adverse and unintended economic consequences across the economy, especially absent a broader consideration of Canada's insolvency legislative framework. Ultimately, the best solution for pensioners and employees of a distressed company is to encourage successful restructurings so that it can keep paying salaries and making contributions to its pension plan. C228, if passed, would discourage this universally desirable outcome despite its merits and despite its laudable intent. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. And now we'll hear from the Canadian Federation of Pensioners, Mr. Michael Powell.
Thank you. We've submitted the specific changes we believe need to be made to C228, so I won't discuss those here. But I will be talking about some of the points included in the submission that we made, supported by CFP and 5 other leading Canadian seniors advocacy organizations. Fundamental challenge for this committee is to choose between status quo or extending super priority in insolvency to the unfunded pension liability. We know the status quo, the intended consequences. We've heard of the personal stories of those impacted, tragedies. CFP estimates that since 1982, 250,000 vulnerable Canadian seniors have had their income reduced for the rest of their lives. We've all heard the unintended consequences, and a quote that I have is there would be a significant negative impact on Canadian productivity and employment since businesses will have a tougher time getting finances and their costs could rise dramatically. If true, those consequences would have significant impact on the Canadian economy, a measurable impact, which is why I don't understand why we're having this discussion. That quote's from the 2005 Committee Review of C-51, the Wage Earner Protection Program. WEP extended super priority to unpaid wages and other items in insolvency and was passed in 2005. Note that WEP impacts every insolvency. If you extend super priority to the unfunded pension liability, it only affects that small number, declining number of companies with defined benefit pensions. What I ask is, where are the binders of evidence of Canada's poor economic performance versus competitors since 2005? If these charges were true, we should be towards the bottom of GDP growth, the top in unemployment, the top in companies filing for insolvency, the top in liquidations. Where is the data? The reality is that super priority would simply put a price on abandoning pensions in insolvency. Today, the minute a company files, the pension deficit disappears like a puff of smoke. Be honest, knowing there's no penalty for underfunding a pension and no obligation that survives insolvency, what CEO is going to fully fund their pension? Allocating funds to the pension instead of, for example, dividends, when not legally required, would get you fired. As Mr. Sean said Monday, companies only do what is required. I have a Monday comment as well. Federally regulated pensions are not required to be 100% solvency funded, at least not as I understand the term required. Statistics support this. From 2012 to 2020, on average, 73% of federally regulated plans were under 100% solvency. That's not required. Now, as mentioned on Monday, in 2021, median funding was 109%, which means today is the time to act. Because when that gap is small to get to full funding and many plans are fully funded, then companies can de-risk their pension and pose no threat to lenders going in the future. If you change, and we know that companies are going to regulators and looking for contribution holidays, looking to reduce those solvency levels. Now is the time to step in and stop that. If you change the rules, corporate behavior will change. And this was the case with Air Canada. At the time of its insolvency in 2003, Air Canada had a $1.3 billion pension deficit. Under ministry monitoring, by 2013, that deficit ballooned to $4.2 billion. In 2013, Finance Minister of the time, Jim Flaherty, agreed to further relief subject to restrictions until the pension was fully funded. Executive compensation increases, special bonuses, other incentive plans were curtailed. The airline was prevented from paying dividends, buying back stock. With those restrictions in place, that pension was fully funded by May 2015. Change the monitor and companies do what is required, change the rules, and behavior will change. In Canada, we have two levels of legislation, and pensioners get whipsawed between them. We have insolvency legislation, and underneath it, 11 different pension benefit acts. ACPM, who are not unique, but they're here, so I'm going to use them as an example, argue the pension shouldn't be protected in insolvency. Insolvency is not the place. Yet they advocate for the removal of solvency requirements in pension regulations. The most recent one I know of was in Saskatchewan a couple of years ago. It's online. You can find it. And we know that anything less than 100% solvency funding increases the risk to pensioners. It leaves pensioners as acceptable collateral damage in insolvency. Since 2005, proposed solutions from governments and the greater pension industry have all been based on shifting risk from the companies who willingly accepted the obligation to the pensioners without obtaining pensioners' informed consent. This is the very definition of elder financial abuse. Super priority would at least partly address the power imbalance in insolvency. This committee will determine whether to continue the status quo or to protect vulnerable Canadian seniors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. And now we will hear from the Canadian Labour Congress and Ms. Soban Vipond for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and hello to you and all the committee members, and thank you for this opportunity to appear in front of you. My name is Siobhan Vipond, and I'm the Executive Vice President of the Canadian Labour Congress, Canada's largest central labour body. And we as Canada's unions advocate on national issues on behalf of all workers from coast to coast to coast. Pensions are essential to the financial security and well-being of working people. And Canadian research shows that income from an employer pension plan can make the difference between financial security in retirement and a decline in living standards compared to pre-retirement levels. Next to their homes, pension savings are one of the most important pool of assets that workers accumulate over their lifetime. It's important to remember that workplace pensions are not gifts from employers. Pensions benefits are deferred wages. Pensions are earned and paid for by workers, and workers depend on that money being there for them when they retire. Employers are legally obligated to provide those pensions when a worker retires, and it is frustrating and unjust that this legal obligation can be torn up when a company enters insolvency. When a company enters insolvency proceedings, workers and pensioners go to the back of the line. They are essentially treated like involuntary, unsecured creditors of the firm behind the banks and secured creditors. No one asked workers and plan members if they would, lend the value of their pension benefits to their employer. It's quite the opposite. Plan members trust their employer will live up to the terms of the pension bargain. And unlike commercial creditors, employees and pensioners are generally unable to protect themselves against the risk of their employer's insolvency. If their previous employer enters bankruptcy, pensioners cannot easily return to work and find new and additional sources of income. In 2018, Sears Canada pensioners outside Ontario learned that their pension benefits would be reduced by 30%. One Sears retiree working in Calgary, happens to be my hometown, who worked for 44 years, took a monthly pension cut of $800 a month. After a lifetime of work, a lifetime of pension contributions, his pension was slashed in retirement. Another retiree who worked for 35 years saw his pension drop $450. And in anticipation of benefit reductions, this 72-year-old pensioner took a job at Home Depot as a greeter. For many others, taking a minimum wage job to make up for pension reductions is not a realistic option, nor should it be an expectation. The way pensions and benefits are treated in insolvency is outrageous and unfair. And despite this, government has not taken steps to extend protections to pensioners and plan members. The government's legislated changes in response to the Sears Canada debacle were woefully inadequate. In 2019, Bill C-97 made minor changes around the edges of the problem, and none of these legislated changes would have prevented another Sears Canada or the pain and suffering that caused the Sears pensioners. And this is especially frustrating since evidence shows that many companies with underfunded pension plans could eliminate the solvency deficiencies of their plans by allocating just a portion of their shareholders' payouts to the pension plan. Study shows that many firms consciously choose to reward shareholders and senior executives, boosting the stock prices rather than fully funding their pension plans. This leaves pensioners and plan members at risk if the company becomes insolvent. Over the years, we at the CLC have supported numerous NDP and Bloc members' bills, and none of these bills have been allowed to proceed. For years, we have urged governments to put in place national mandatory pension insurance akin to the Ontario Pension Benefit Guarantee Fund. We have been unable to get traction on this idea. The CLC supports the passage of revised Bill C-228, and we support the bill's proposed changes to the CCAA and BIA. In the proposed amendments to the Pension Benefits Standards Act, which are not well conceived and should be deleted from C-228 in their entirety. We will be very happy to answer any questions that we may have, and we know at the center of this issue is the workers and pensioners across this country. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Vipond and the CLC for your opening remarks. And now we will go to the United Steelworkers via video conference. I have Nicolas Lapierre, who's with us for 5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I greet all the members of your committee. I thank you for this opportunity. The United Steelworkers represents 2,500 workers throughout Canada, 60,000 alone in Quebec alone. In 2018, 19, 20, we've met a number of senators and parliamentarians to make them aware of the necessary changes on this credit and on bankruptcies and insolvability. We have had dozens of our militants and activists on the Hill trying to defend our interest. When a business goes out of business or goes into bankruptcy, there are troubles. There is a mining company, Clift, took umbrage in the Bankruptcy Act, and they had a number of retirees saw their pensions drop between 21 and 30%. Various legal claims were made, and we were able to recoup a couple of million, but at the end of the day, our pensioners and survivors had cuts in their pensions between 8 and 10%. That's about $200 and for some, and $600, $700 per month for others. In the private sector, there's no indexation, so a retiree who's on his pension in the 80s hasn't been indexed since then. So in 2015, the impact is even greater. We lobbied you, and we spent 6 weeks of lobbying on the Hill, and you were convinced with some arguments, but this could, in fact, hinder the relaunching of the economy. We're quite aware of that argument, and we adjusted our perspective, and Deputy MP Gladu and her proposed changes said that we should be move up the list, but behind the banks, because otherwise it would hinder economic recovery. So we tried to answer to those that many political parties had these concerns. We know that 228 will put us behind the banks, but at least in front of school boards and municipal governments. So that's it. That's a gain. It's a good structural gain for workers. It would be progress for unionized workers, but also ununionized workers. We, the steel workers, feel that it's your role as legislators to protect Canadian citizens from a possible loss of income because an enterprise goes into bankruptcy protection. So I'm making this pitch, this plea to your responsibility and your empathy for people who are older, 70, 80 years old. These are people who are living in distress. Canadian citizens voted for you because they had confidence and trust in you, the legislators. But it's up to you to grab the ball and take advantage of this bill and say enough is enough. It's been decades that this situation has been going on. Several bills have been proposed. But this bill is a result of a consensus among all political parties currently. In 2021, there was a consensus on the committee, but unfortunately, we dropped the writ and it died on the order paper. So there was a consensus. We tried to meet your concerns. We want to have the pensioners before the banks. They're not. They're behind them now, but still ahead of the school boards and the municipalities, at least. This reflects, I think, your concern at a very difficult consensus, Bill 228. Banks are first, and pensioners come second. So we're just picking up the crumbs that are left behind after the secured creditors line up. I think it would be a giant step forward for workers, unionized or not, all Canadians, for our elderly. Be diligent. Put a little water in your wine. Bill C-228 is not perfect, but it still represents a very good consensus for workers. I could give you a lot of examples. Clift, Sears, May, White Birch. How many situations are we going to deal with in future? So I'm appealing to your sense of responsibility, your diligence, your humanity, that this bill be passed as quickly as possible, and that you can brag then that you've helped the middle class.
This is for your opening remarks. We are going to move to our rounds of questions. In our first round, witnesses and members, it will be equal time for all the parties, which is 6 minutes. We are starting with the Conservatives, and we do have with us today MP Gladu, who's the author of C-228. MP Gladu.
Thank you, Chair, and thank Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses that are here. I want to assure Monsieur Le Peer that the priority that is assigned in C228 is exactly that which was put into 253 with my bloc colleague Marlene Gill. It is before banks, secured creditors, preferred creditors, and unsecured creditors. Now, I only have 6 minutes, so I'm going to make some quick questions. First question to Mr. Van Gorder. Do you agree with the priority that we've assigned to pensions in Bill C-228?
Yes, we do. We've had some suggestions as you've seen in our letter from our coalition of groups, but certainly that's the kind of direction will take great strides to make this wrong or right.
Thank you. And to Mr. Powell, we heard that the pension plan reform cycle is 3 years. We have suggested that instead of the 5 years coming into force that's in my bill, that maybe 3 years would be better. Do you agree with the priority, and do you agree with the coming into force that's been suggested?
Yes, I do, to both of those. And again, I want to reiterate the point that pensions are very well funded right now, and if we act quickly, we can take advantage of that opportunity.
Yes, I noted that the DB plan impact for federal plans, this is the first year that they've actually been above 100% funded, so now is a great time to act. A question for Ms. Vipond. There were several sections of the bill that I had understood that you didn't like. The one was the sections 8.1 and 8.2 that allowed a company in bankruptcy to change the type of defined pension that it was. Is it correct that you would like to see that deleted?
Yeah, we know that the strongest types of pension are these defined benefit pensions, so we think that's extremely important. I can pass it to my colleague Chris Roberts, who has joined me today to get into the technical side of it, but we do appreciate that this is being prioritized, but thank you for highlighting those changes.
Just very quickly, I thought the provisions in the bill that allow an administrator to apply to the superintendent for permission to transfer the liability and assets of a plan that is sponsored by a distressed company was just under detailed. There need to be far more protections for DB plan members to ensure that those accrued DB benefits are not converted to DC or lesser benefits. So we would just argue to strike that entirely.
Sorry. Yes, it was actually a drafting error on my part. That was a leftover from a C405 that we tried to get rid of that part of the phrasing, so that will definitely need to go out. The other thing that I understand is that the Canadian Labour Congress had concerns about the suggestion of the insurance mechanism to get a third party to insure a pension, and so is it true that you'd like to see that part deleted as well?
Yeah, again, there's just some confusion over the terms, the unspecified or undefined terms in this portion of C228. And for the purposes of clarity, for the purposes of precision and I think simplicity, best just to eliminate those aspects. So yes, we'd agree.
Thank you. And for Mr. Powell, you have undertaken quite an engagement with stakeholders across the country. Could you describe for the committee the efforts that you undertook and what you heard?
Yes, we actually got involved in with the Commons Committee petition that Ryan Turnbull sponsored. 12,332 Canadians signed on saying that pension protection was important to them. We've also, as CFP, run some email campaigns, the most recent in support of C228. We had just under 7,000 Canadians from coast to coast to coast sign that. What I found most impressive, and if you've tried to do email campaigns, you'll understand this, is that well over 50% of the people who used our email tool checked the box saying they would like to be engaged further on this issue. And to have a mailing list of like 3,600 people that want to fight for your particular issue, that is powerful.
Thank you. And for Mr. Gray, we've had quite a rough time through the pandemic. And so I wondered if you had any data on how many companies have gone bankrupt and how many would be in a position where their pension funds were insolvent.
Certainly, Canadian businesses have had a difficult time throughout the pandemic. I don't have that data in front of me, that number, but we could provide that in writing to the committee.
that would be terrific if you could provide that to us. Now, one of my colleagues was describing to me today that if you had an insolvent pension fund, there actually is already a mechanism to transfer the risk to a third party. Do you think that is a mechanism that would address some of the concerns that banks would have about credit?
It's possible that it could. As I mentioned before, there's a delicate balance in the insolvency framework, and there's a delicate balance that's already been achieved in, in bankruptcy framework as well. My suggestion to you would be to hear from someone from the lending community on that.
Yes, I certainly did hear quite a bit from the lending community and tried to find some common ground or some changes to granularity in the bill that we could do. But at the end of the day, I think they have a concern that I'm not sure that it's truly founded. I think there are other ways, and we know the government has certainly stepped in and backfilled whenever anybody got into trouble that had a large corporation in Canada. Thank you, Chair.
Glad to. And now to the Liberals, and we have MP MacDonald for 6 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you for the witnesses being here. Great discussion, very important topic for now and into the future, obviously. But I want to go to the Association of Pension Management and Rick Merrow and/or his team. Can you explain what could cause a DB plan liability?
Ross or Andrea?
Do you mean an unfunded position at the point when the company goes bankrupt?
Yes.
So typically what happens is there's a stress event in the economy, and the investment portfolio backing the liabilities has got a mixture of fixed income and equities. The equities would lose their value, down 15, 20%. And so the value of the assets comes down. In addition, typically, central banks move to lower interest rates. So as we move the interest rates lower in a stress period where there's a recession, the liabilities go up. So you get kind of whipsawed where the value of the assets go down at that point in time, and the liabilities go up. Now, not every bankruptcy occurs when there's an economic recession or a troubling period, but many of them do for a result of customers cutting back on purchase of their products.
Also, do you think that making pension deficit a preferred claim or having a cap superiority would allow a better balance?
Well, our concern is the fact that we're currently in a situation where, we're a big believer in the defined benefit plan because of the value it provides to members in society. We're at 9% in the private sector. And so we're trying to balance the various interests to stop that 9 going to 0. It's declined over the last 20 years from 20 to 9. So, we've got some solutions, and Andrea, do you maybe want to add to the answer?
Sure. I mean, we are not in favor of a priority for pension deficits. We are in favor of helping retirees of insolvent company pension plans. If their benefit is going to be cut, traditionally winding up the plan, buying annuities from an insurance company, as has been alluded to, there are other mechanisms we can use other than a super priority to improve their recovery and to get them, like the Stelco retirees, to 100%. Or in an insolvency, like Air Canada has been mentioned, was actually a great success story. Every Air Canada pensioner is getting 100 cents of every pension dollar they were promised because of the restructuring that was the collaborative restructuring that took place in 2004, and a file that I was deeply involved in. There are other ways. And we are supportive of improving retiree outcomes. These are sad stories. We all have a ton of sympathy for it, but we are very worried about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. That 9% represents 1.2 million Canadians who, if their DB plan winds up, they will not have a retirement pension of the caliber that they're expecting.
Interesting. So if this becomes law, what do you think could be an entry force that would allow companies with DB plans to adjust and avoid possible bankruptcies? Like, what's your opinion? Or where's that?
They will wind
balance?
up their plans.
Yeah, I concur. I think many of them will use this as a catalyst to wind up their plans.
All right. So, you know, as you read many times, and we talk about evaluations done by creditors, and I'm not even sure who to direct this to. Maybe Alex from the chamber. Can you give me any example or any cases where accurately assessing risk profiles, there was major mistakes in larger companies or even smaller companies, for that example, that may have effect on insolvencies and bankruptcies?
I can't give you a specific example, but what I can do is sort of illustrate the fundamental challenges of doing so. Examining a pension solvency is not like going onto your app and seeing how much money you have in your account. It's based on actuarial forecasts, which are essentially a snapshot in time. They can take weeks to prepare. So it involves a fair bit of forecasting, and that underscores the fundamental challenge that it's not necessarily a readily available number.
Thank you. How much time, Mr. Chair? 1 minute. So, you know, we're dealing with a situation, and I think everybody is on the premise that this is a good bill with possible modifications based on the conversations that we're having here. It seems like everybody's on the same page, which often doesn't happen. But so I guess, you know, Mr. Powell, how do we all come together and ensure that all sides are being looked after in this regard, to ensure that, you know, we are going in the right direction? Because we all hear you. I don't think there's anybody challenging the situation or the process, but how do we get there, in your opinion?
Well, I have to confess, my undergrad's engineering, so that's my view on the life. And I think you go to the data, and I issue the challenge. WEP was implemented in 2005. At that time, these same industries, these same groups, made the same claim that disaster was going to occur, and they can provide no data of what happened, what bad things happened. We hear that, and the cycle, and I can't remember the ACPM person that talked about the cycle of business, and when businesses are failing and pensions are in trouble. And I agree with that, and that's the textbook answer. That doesn't answer why over 70% on an annual basis, 70% of federally regulated pensions were underfunded from 2012 to 2020. Those two things don't jive. So the companies are playing, I'm sorry to say this, a game. They don't have to fully fund their pension. It's in their interest not to. It's a cash flow gain for them. So I really struggle with how you give them the cash flow they want and protect pensioners. I think that's the other thing. And I do want to clarify one thing as well. Stelco is one of my members. And the reason Stelco succeeded wasn't because they were given a trustee over on the side. The reason they succeeded was because there was a revenue flow built into that pension. Money went into that pension and still is going into that pension. The purchaser of the company, they didn't take over full responsibility, but they put some money in, and there's all sorts of technical complexities.
Thank you, Mr. Powell.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. And thank you, MP MacDonald. And now we are going to have questions from the bloc, and MP Samari for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. D'abord, salut.
Thank you very much, and Mr. Chair, and thanks to the witnesses. It's been very interesting, all the arguments that you're putting forward. But my questions will be for Mr. Lapierre. Thank you for your appearance today, and thank you for your evidence. I don't know if you was clear with the interpretation what Mr. Powell has just said, and if you might have a comment to what he has just said. Well, law and legislation allows companies to underfund, and that's a fact. It's permissible. But you can understand that for the retirees, it's very difficult to say, well, it's not prohibited, so why not? And if it goes into bankruptcy, it's legitimate not to pay you what we owe you. A DB plan guarantees a certain level of pension, right to your death, and even survival rights for your spouse. As the CLC said, it's deferred wages. when we negotiate collective agreements, we put less on the salary to put that focus on the pensions. This is a choice we make. And workers who will become retirees are far from discussing that in 10 or 15 years, they're not going to see what they put into it. We can't tolerate that situation. We have to give them a little bit more a hand up and treat them as we do other creditors if necessary. Otherwise, they can't make both ends meet. Thank you. So workers who negotiate a collective agreement are rather than asking a higher wage rate, they'll say we'll even stay put or take a cut in order to improve the pension benefit. They're not going to be on the front of the line, obviously, if there's a bankruptcy. The current situation allows enterprises to underfund the plan, and all the contributions you've made for your pension, it's legal that's underfinanced and that you will be losing a chunk of your pension, up to 20-30%. Once again, your observations on the current situation, because this bill would allow us to resolve a lot of those problems for retirees. Thanks. Your interpretation of the situation is absolutely perfect. With this particular bill, we're going to increase the chances for our retirees to get a better chance to go get more if there's liquidation or bankruptcy. The deficit could even be higher than the revenues of the enterprise, but we're improving our chances with this bill than before. And I have to say, particularly for survivors, I have elders 70, 75, 80 years old. They came to my office in 2018-19, and they had to choose between getting their meds or getting their groceries. And they lost their group insurance plans altogether. It's not reasonable to treat our seniors that way. Well, let's hope that this time, with the bill put forward by Marilyn Gladu, it'll work and we'll be able to change that. I appreciated your comments. Everything you've just said really moves me. You reminded us that pensions in the private sector are not necessarily indexed, so already there's a loss of purchasing power. It's not indexed. And then, of course, if a company's wound up, they lose 20 or 30%. So they do, in fact, have to choose between their medications or their groceries in many cases. Major corporations hadn't put in their share. They underfunded the regime, the pension plan. I guess that's a signal. I got. Do I have 2 minutes? Okay, good. So that wasn't the 2-minute bell. As you explained in your presentation, the importance of allowing the refinancing of these plans before paying off the banks, let's say. If you'd like to explain a little bit further on that, and my colleague, Ms. Gladu, says hi. She's just come in. She was at a Louis Riel commemoration ceremony. Well, as I said earlier, this bill, and even the previous one, 253, Ms. Gill, let's concentrate on what we have before us today. That is the product of a compromise. 3 years of hammering together, meeting with you. I won't name the parties, but there were some that were super preoccupied by this, because prior we might have been ahead of the banks in line. But every MP who saw a problem with that, you can't hinder with the banks because you're going to slow down any economic recovery. Well, I think that this bill shows that we can do it. it's a consensus. It's not doesn't put us in the first place, but it really is an improvement. So this is why we're begging you. It's been debated and debated for years now. I think we have all the ingredients to move forward quickly and resolve this situation and show Canadians that we are concerned with their financial security. Thank you very much.
We're going to hear from the NDP, and this will close off this first round. And we have MP Angus joining us.
Thank you, Chair. It's an honor to be at this committee. If I was just reading the business press about bankruptcies, it would seem to me sad and markets and, tragedy, and everyone tried to do their best. But I come from mining country, and we've seen it, how it plays out. And we've seen how Pamour Gold Mine, an extraordinary gold operation, how it was taken over by Peggy Whitty in Royal Oak, and it was stripped of assets, and how she paid out bonuses to to all the members of the board of directors. They left that mine till it fell into the ground, and then they gave themselves all golden parachutes, and they walked away. And that wasn't considered criminal behavior. She was Mining Woman of the Year. And the Pamour miners, many of them who are injured, who had illnesses, they were left with nothing. So I want to ask the Canadian Labour Congress, is this just something that happens in my region among working class people, or is this how corporate Canada has treated workers and their pension obligations time and time and time again?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I think almost every witness here has said that there are lots of examples. And so it isn't just in one region. And quite honestly, the example you gave, but also when we look at the Sears Canada, everything that happened was legal. Everything that happened was allowed. So we sit here looking at you saying, we're asking you to do something, because nobody hears the story of these pensioners and thinks it's just, thinks it's fair, and thinks it's what should be happening. We know that people should be, have a good job, get a retirement, but yet we've set up a system that is, getting that, not doing them well, because these rules are that it can just be ripped out from under them. So we know that these rules have to change so that we are protecting pensioners. And as because as Lapierre said, which is they can't be making that impossible choice between whether it's food and this. I also think it's false to say that this means it's not helping the economy. We know that the best way that we can build our economy is, to put money in, people's pockets who are consumers. Guess what? That means giving workers enough money so that they can make choices. And so I appreciate your framing. You were absolutely right. And it is heartbreaking to hear from retirees and pensioners with their stories, but it also is a call to action for us to make changes.
Well, I want to follow up on the call to action, because when the Pamour mine went down and Kerr Addison gold mine, one of the richest mines in the country, that was stripped of its assets, and the pensioners were left with nothing. The pensioners believed that they had savings. They were lied to. And then they found that they were at the back of the line. And so when I hear people saying how unfair it is that we move these people who spent their life and literally gave the health of their life to the company, that it's somehow we're going to affect business if we give them any priority. What happened at Pamour happened 30 years ago. I would have thought that would have changed, but then I look at Sears, and then we get told, oh, well, bricks and mortar business, they can't compete, blah, blah. Sears was a damn good business. It was taken over by a hedge fund bandit, Eddie Lampert, who stripped that. Again, perfectly legal. And so we had legislation brought in that was supposed to protect those Sears workers. So what lessons have we learned? Did C-97 do the job that it was supposed to do, or are we just continually letting these bandits rob pension funds and strip assets out of good, valuable companies?
That's exactly what is happening, is that we're prioritizing the shareholders and the CEOs over those promises and those deferred benefits and deferred wages that workers have had. And so we need to see those changes, because I have to absolutely agree with you, as we will be having these same conversations in 30 years if we don't take action that's actually going to mean that these pensions and these promises are protected from these arbitrary kind of profits being pulled out. And they're not being pulled out of nowhere. They're being pulled out of the pockets of these pensioners. And that's a complete unfair, scenario that is happening. And It's different when you take a pension money from a pensioner versus a bank having to deal with a little bit of loss. So why are we coming after that? Because one means you can lose your house and not buy, prescriptions and not be able to put food on your table. The other one means that maybe your profits are a little bit percentage lower. And so I think we really need to examine of who we're protecting in the current system.
Concerns we had with this bill was in some of the drafting language, and I understand from talking with my colleague from Elmwood Strathcona, talking with colleagues about changing it to improve it. One of the questions for New Democrats has always been the issue of the protection for termination and severance pay. Because when Peggy Whitty walked from Pamour Mine, everybody was left high and dry. They showed up at work and there was no work. And termination, severance pay, pension, these are all tied up. How important is that to have in language, in law, protection?
Yeah, I'm going to ask my colleague Chris to jump in on this one, because we know the reasons why there's lots of amendments happening to this is because this is a complex issue and there's a lot of history. Absolutely. But we're glad you're attending to it. So Chris, do you want to go into that detail about that?
Sure, as best I can. I mean, the Wage Earner Protection Program has been expanded to cover more termination benefits. That's very important for vulnerable workers. It would be great to have that in this legislation so that those owed payments are also protected. Also, OPEBs, the other pension and related employee benefits in retirement, are extremely important to retirees, and those aren't featured in this legislation. So there's still more work to be done, and I would even say, in response to the member who asked, well, how can we come together around some of the proposals? I think some of the proposals that ACPM has forwarded about allowing plans to temporize instead of winding them up at the worst possible moment, it makes a lot of sense. So there are many steps we can take to really fully protect pensioners and plan members, but I think it does start with moving them up the queue and not leaving them at the back of the bus in insolvency.
Thank you very much. Thank you, MP Angus. Members, witnesses, we're moving the second round. In this round, we start off with the Conservatives. I have MP Lawrence up for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for all the panelists who are here today. And I would say that I would like to just say a kind word about for those companies that are putting a DB pension, that are taking that risk. They are helping Canadians by being part of the 9%, not the 91% of private companies that don't have a DB. So I think that needs to be stated on the record. That being said, Mr. Gray and Mr. Dunlap, I've heard you say I've heard you say over and over again that these pensions are going to be wound up. These pensions are going to be wound up. Yet I haven't heard one shred of evidence, not one bit of data, as Mr. Powell has pointed out. Can you point to? Would you stake your professional reputation that 50% of these DB are going to be wrapped up? If this bill passes, that 25%, that 10% are 5%. Would either of you be willing to stake your professional reputation?
Well, maybe I'll go first. I mean, I don't know what specifically the numbers will be wound up. I can tell you that when I interact with clients, they're concerned. Now, DB in the private sector has gone from 20 down to 9 over the last 20 years. So businesses are concerned about the availability of credit and the increased cost of credit. So it's going to be some number. So I would say you're going to see some companies.
With respect, Mr. Dunlap, I apologize, my time is short, is that being concerned or some number isn't good enough when I'm talking to folks who are going to potentially lose their pension. And when I look at this from a greater perspective, one of the things you guys are all in the business of risk. And one of the things we look at, one is, what's the equity? Who's in the better position to absorb it? So clearly, Mr. Gray, Mr. Dunlap, we've got to agree that secured creditors, who are often multi-millionaire, transnational, multi-billion-dollar corporations, are in better position to absorb that risk than a 74-year-old senior just trying to pay her rent or her mortgage or to eat.
Mr. Lawrence, maybe I could answer on behalf of the ACPM. We did poll our members, of which some of Canada's largest defined benefit pension plan sponsors are included in that group. And we asked them, if Bill C-228 made your access to capital more expensive, what would you do? Over 40% of them said they would wind up their defined benefit pension plan. that is based on our membership. Anecdotally, I can tell you that is backed up with the conversations I'm having. I cannot think of a more and direct way of killing defined benefit pension plans in the private sector.
I understand what you're saying, but quite frankly, they're biased. What are they going to say? Are they going to say this will, which will inhibit their ability to have cash flows that have been talked about? They're going to say, oh, this is great. Talk is cheap. And quite frankly, your suggestion that there's a free lunch, that simply by changing the investment formula that we'll be able to save more of these, doesn't make sense. Because if you're increasing return, you are increasing the risk, right? And who's going to bear that risk? Ultimately, it's going to be the pensioners.
Right. I mean, I suppose there's a difference between investing in risk-free or very near risk-free assets and moderately risky assets to improve the outcome over the long term.
And that's going to put greater risk. That's not a solution. Putting greater risk on the pensioners is not a reasonable solution.
It has been a solution for Stelco retirees and for all of the pension funds.
Go to the casino. Sometimes I'm going to win, sometimes I'm going to lose. But those individuals who lose, it's not fair to them. We have billion-dollar corporations that are in a position to absorb this loss. It shouldn't be on the backs of pensioners.
I mean, I guess I would put it to you whether or not it's fair to those active employees that they will no longer have a defined benefit pension plan. And that's the choice. You're choosing between
Here's the thing, too, and I'll challenge you on that as well. You know what? I used to do due diligence when I practiced law. And you know what? If, in fact, there's not a risk, there's not a cost, meaning that if these companies are managing their pensions appropriately and diligently like they're supposed to, there's not going to be additional cost because the lender's going to look at that and go, oh, wow, you've got a beautiful pension here. It's all annuitized. You've got no risk. This is going to be paid for. You're doing all the right things. We're not adding a dime of interest on this, only for those companies that are investing it inappropriately, that are short funding the employees, that there's going to be additional cost. And maybe there should be.
They're high risk. I mean, I think there are studies that have been done showing that the cost of capital will increase for companies that are investment grade who have defined benefit pension plans, and we can provide those to you. I would also say a well-funded pension plan at a point in time is not necessarily an indication that the pension plan will always be well-funded. Banks assess risk. They will assess this risk. It will add cost to the capital for defined benefit sponsors. And let me just repeat, ACPM is for helping pensioners, just not in this way. The super priority is the issue. We have suggested in our materials 3 concrete ways that parliamentarians can help pensioners, and we urge the committee, because of the 1.2 million Canadians in defined benefit pension plans for whom their pension should be valued as well, for this committee to study this issue further so that we can say with authority that yes, there's no risk, or in fact, we're okay for 5 million of this 1.2 to lose their DB pension, and that's fine. That's a cost of this bill that we're accepting. But I don't think the studies have been done in order to assess that.
Thank you, MP Lawrence. And now we're going to go to the Liberals. MP Zerowitz for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I just want to say I've paid for a number of years very close attention to this issue just because a number of people in my riding were really, really impacted by Sears and by their bankruptcy. And so they're still very traumatized by it. I've also been very blessed that before politics, I had about 20 years of experience in the business sector, particularly in biotech and in the banking industry. And again, I do quite a bit of reading, and I do believe that companies know ahead of time whether they're going to be filing for bankruptcy and whether they're planning on restructuring. And often, I have found that employees are the last to learn. So I do believe that pensioners need some additional protection. Far more than what exists right now, and I do believe it needs to be 100% protected. Now, I do want to thank all the witnesses for being here. All of your presentations and your answers are very important today, so thank you for being here, and thank you for your patience. My first question is to the Association of Canadian Pension Management. I have a note from our Library of Parliament, and it's very similar to what you were saying. It says Stats Canada data shows that the percentage of paid workers covered by defined benefit pension plan in the private sector decreased from 21.3% in 2000 to 9.6% in 2020. During that period, many employers have been abandoning their defined benefit pension plans, in part because of the volatile and onerous funding requirements associated with such plans. So I guess my question to you is, Is it that that's the way that it's going anyways, in terms of defined benefit plans being converted into defined contribution plans? And so I would like to hear your thoughts on that, just because I think you've made an argument to say that if this piece of legislation moves forward, that it would actually accelerate defined benefits being canceled.
Sure, I'll start, and then Ross, feel free to jump in. So the decline of the defined benefit pension plan in the private sector is a known issue, and it is one that provincial legislatures across the country have tried to reverse by tweaking funding obligations and revamping, in a lot of cases, funding obligations so that pension plans can be maintained on a going concern, so that there is more of an incentive to maintain defined benefit pension plans. This bill works in opposition to all of those initiatives, and I'll turn it over to Ross to respond as well.
Yeah, I would just reiterate that we're big believers in the value of a defined benefit plan benefit for plan members. We just see the value of that, which is why we're trying to find a solution, and we've been working on.
I totally agree with that. Like, I think all of us would love defined benefit plans, but what I'm trying to say is, it's you're already seeing companies that are starting to transition out of that as well.
So it's our belief that this would accelerate that to significantly below the 9, which then leaves the active group that's accruing that benefit with less of a benefit.
So
that's really the concern that we have.
And then I think my colleague partially asked that, and I want to be very clear. If this bill were to go through, there's a number of different proposals on the table, whether it's a year or 3 years or 5 years for implementation. What would be your opinion in terms of how many years is needed if this bill were to move forward for implementation?
I mean, typically longer would be better for them to react and look at their loans and their collective agreements. So 5 years would seem reasonable to us.
Okay, and maybe I'll go over to Mr. Gray. Mr. Gray, you've outlined a number of risks. I think you were talking about interim loans and impact on interest rates, and I think you had mentioned a number of risks. What would be your opinion in terms of how long should be the delay in terms of implementation or coming into force, which would help mitigate some of the concerns that you've raised?
I agree with Mr. Dunlop that longer would be better. Taking into account pension plan valuation cycles, required notice to members, as I outlined in my statement, 7 years.
7 years?
7 years, yeah.
Okay. I just want to say a huge thanks to the Association of Canadian Pension Management for putting 3 proposals on the table. Did you, Mr. Gray, have any additional proposals on the table if there were going to be adjustments to this bill that would actually keep the pensioners' pensions whole, but be able to address some of the concerns that you've raised around companies?
We actually jointly signed a letter with them on the proposed proposals. Feel free to take a look on the committee website.
Half minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc, pour Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair, for Mr. Lapierre and Mr. Powell, if you have any time after. We've just heard a number of issues on the risk to enterprises and corporations and management that this creates. If this bill would be adopted, would you think that these are unsurmountable risks? Can we live with it? Is it worth it? Thank you. Mr. Lapierre, then Mr. You mean converting DB plans? Yes, well, partly. Any way you look at it, there's that element, of course, to it. But the risk in general for corporations, what would you say to that? Is it? Well, I don't see much risk involved here because the majority of DBs are within the major enterprises. You're talking about that 9%, where it's highly unionized. If a corporation wanted to go towards a defined contribution system, it has to be negotiated. But the parties get to that conclusion, well, if they negotiated in good faith, then that's what they've done. But there's a risk for the pensioners in that case. All they have to do is you properly fund the plan, but they don't want to do that. By analogy, they live very well with the risk. If you're underfunding on a consistent basis, that's running a risk. If they don't want any risk, fund it fully. But it's permissible by law to underfund in today's legislative framework. Okay, I like that analysis, Mr. Powell. Pardon me. Would you like to add anything to that?
In terms of risk, the companies have a lot of resources to manage the risk. And again, I'll go back to the data. When you look at the percentage of companies that routinely and normally underfund their pension, that's a matter of choice. It's not because they have to, it's because it gives them cash flow.
Thank you, MP Saint-Louis. Merci. And now to MP Angus for the NDP for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lapierre, my grandfather, Charlie Angus, was a steel worker. He died at the mine. He was almost 70 years old because in those days you worked until you died. I was underground recently at a gold mine in Timmins, and I met a 70-year-old man working the drills. And you work the drills when you're young. He was working the drills because he said his pension had completely failed him. So we're told here by some of our witnesses and the business community that we need to wait longer. We need to think more about this, that this might affect capital. How do you see the effect of this on steel workers, as particularly those who are working in underfunded pensions?
Well, the bill would reassure them, but I think it would demonstrate the importance of the work done by the parliamentary legislator. You're there for the common good. You're there to defend the middle class, among other things, and to find a proper balance. We want corporations to make money. We want workers to live well as well. And this is what you're doing when you're promising them a DB plan. At least honor your commitments or establish a process which will minimize the negative impacts on workers. This bill is not going to guarantee that they'll get 100% all the time, but it's improving their chances. If we take a look at the Cliff Mine, Sept-Îles recuperated $7 million in municipal tax, and yet the pension plan was short $10 million. We all pay taxes, but a municipality can sort of spread out that debt, whereas they got 30, 40 years maybe to pay off a deficit or debt. The municipality won't die. But somebody who's 70, 80 years old with a surviving spouse or a spouse, we can't just abandon them. They can't be living in anxiety and stress all the time and no money in their pockets. So this would give a signal. As parliamentarians, as an opposition party, as a party in power, we can change things. Thank you.
And now to the Conservatives for 5 minutes, MP Morantz.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I've been listening intently. It's been a very interesting conversation. But I wanted to seek some clarifications on a few things that have been said. I think I'll start with Mr. Powell. One of the concerns that I do share with Mr. Gray and the business community is the idea that when you put a pension plan in priority to a secured creditors are going to look at whatever the deal is that they have before them, and they're going to assess the risk. They're going to want to know exactly what they're subordinate to. And just like property taxes or any other items that may be payable under the current legislation and priority to a lender, they will look at that and make that assessment. One of the questions that's come up is, well, what evidence does the business community have to say that lenders are going to back off? That lenders are going to decide not to lend in a particular sector, or if they do lend in a particular sector, that they're going to have to charge more because of the perceived inherent risk. And so I want to go back to your opening statement, because you said something that I wasn't quite following, because you said something about 2005. Something happened in 2005. I'm not aware of it. And you said that if this was going to be an after-market effect on risk for lenders, where is the evidence? And I just wonder if you could just explain that argument to me again, because I want to make sure I understand it. Was that legislation something that put pensions in some sort of position pari passu or in priority to secured creditors that you were talking about?
Sorry, I had a lot to go through, so I was speaking quickly. In 2005, the Wage Earner Protection Program was passed. And the Wage Earner Protection Program gave super priority to unpaid wages, unpaid expenses, and some other things, right? So the issue is making something super priority, what happens? And it happened to be the Insolvency Institute of Canada, the one quote I have, but you can find quotes from other similar organizations. And their quote was, a significant negative impact on Canadian productivity and employment, since businesses will have a tougher time getting financing and their costs could rise dramatically. We've heard that today about 228. So nobody has provided any data that there was any bad thing that happened after WEP. If it was that draconian, if the financial Armageddon was going to occur, we should have data. I mean, these are things that people monitor.
Sorry, was that federal legislation?
Yes. Okay, C-51 was the bill.
Okay.
It was debated in 2005 and passed. I don't have the date in front of me. It was passed in 2005.
And the Wage Earner Priority Act, what did it do that would be different than what this legislation is contemplating?
It covered different things, and because it's wage earner, every company going through insolvency has employees. So it impacts every insolvency since it was implemented. Whereas when we look at this, we're talking about the 9%. You're only looking at those companies that become insolvent, have a defined benefit plan, and haven't fully funded that plan. So that becomes, and I think MP Blakey was making that point on Monday, that that number keeps getting smaller.
And just because I've limited time, I'm going to go to Ms. Bochter for a moment. Ms. Bochter, you said, I think it would be fair to say that when it comes to putting pension plans in super priority, wouldn't it be fair to say that one of the reasons that there's no evidence that lenders might factor in the extra credit risk or refuse to lend is that currently pension plans don't have super priority, so there's no ability to test that theory?
Well, I think there is the ability to test that theory based on the prior restructurings that have occurred. We can see, for example, a case that I assume Monsieur Lapierre knows quite well in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, where the legislation that was passed in order for the lenders to lend into the company once it restructured includes an exemption from the deemed trust provisions in the Ontario Act. Lenders refused to lend unless the Pension Benefits Act Ontario was amended to eliminate the deemed trust. And the unionized members of that steel company agreed to that change. And it was the only condition under which that company was going to get financing.
I have 15 seconds left. Sorry, I have 15 seconds left. I just wanted to ask you one more quick one. Your survey said that 40% of your members said that they would close down their defined benefit pension plans. Of the 9% that still exist, I presume, how many Canadians would be adversely affected if your survey is accurate?
The 9% represents 1.2 million working Canadians accruing a defined benefit pension. Assuming that's equally distributed, 40% of them.
MP Morantz, and now to the Liberals for questions. MP Chattel for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, I think that we all sort of concur that pensions have to be protected, and we believe this in government quite deeply. And the rights of workers, the rights of retirees should be respected. We have a problem not with necessarily all pensions, but particularly DB, defined benefit plans. And of course, there's a shrinking number of these plans, perhaps in part because of the risk. But as Mr. Lapierre said, a pension is a negotiated deferred wage. And so government should do everything possible to protect that. What is also quite important, we mustn't accidentally or in an unforeseen way cause further damage to retirees and their pensions. Nobody wants that. One thing that concerns me in this bill is that it could hinder the restructuring of certain corporations or businesses. A company can, in fact, restructure and perhaps save the business, but also save the pension plan. What I've heard is that there might be some conflict or contradiction in that. Mr. Lapierre, I think, presented a pretty good solution, and I want to make sure that I understood it correctly. In order to ensure, I'm very concerned that, a company that could restructure should. But the money owed to the banks, perhaps, would be captured at the point of restructuring back to the banks, and so it would be depriving our pensioners. However, if the company can stay in business as a going concern, maybe they can rebuild the fund. I think you've understood me correctly, Madame. Well, good. I'm reassured by that. Ms. Vipond.
The priority over pensions and allow the restructuration and save job and save pension. Would you agree with that priority?
Thank you for the question. Obviously, saving jobs is a really important factor of that, and that needs to happen. But we don't think whether it's the super priority or whether the discussion that we're having is going to have as big of an impact as being put on the table. But Chris can add more detail.
If I can add one thing, it's important to remember that in CCAA proceedings, the creditors and the sponsor use the fear of losing everything in liquidation to extract devastating cuts for plan members. And pensioners, to the extent that they even know that this is happening, and other plan members are in a very difficult position. They have no bargaining power. We saw this in Laurentian University being a great example. The fear of being at the end of the queue in a bankruptcy and liquidation situation gives them no ability to resist truly draconian cuts to their pension benefits. What we're asking here is to give plan members a bit of bargaining power in the restructuring process, so that yes, companies can restructure as a going concern, but not solely or primarily on the backs of plan members.
Just to be clear, you do agree with Monsieur Lapierre that would be a way to save the ability of businesses to restructure?
Well, I guess I've just said the opposite, that if plan members are still behind the secured creditors in the Bankruptcy and Act priority of claims, then they won't have the bargaining clout or position in restructuring to have better outcomes. It's easy to talk about a good restructuring process, but there are enormous costs in that process as well. So to give plan members and workers, pensioners, a bit more of a position in the restructuring process, they should go ahead of secured creditors.
Madame Andrea.
Miss Andrea Modak.
About your position on, is there a way, and would that be a solution to give bank a priority over pension to allow company to restructure and save jobs?
Short answer. To give banks a priority over pensions? I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, what Monsieur Lapierre mentioned earlier is that one of the key problems was the restructuring of companies faced with bankruptcy. And if the pensioner have the super priority, then it doesn't allow the restructuring. So briefly, would you think that having banks, in the order of priority first and then pension would allow the restructuring of the company?
So you're asking whether or not, if the pension deficit had a spot perhaps behind secured creditors but ahead of unsecured creditors, if that would be a good compromise. I mean, I would say it could be a good compromise in some situations. Insolvencies, CCAAs can be very complicated and nuanced. It depends on the liquidation value of the company. It depends on the position of all of these creditors and how much there is to go around. I mean, it could be that your secured creditors are going to recover everything and there will be nothing left for pensioners. It could be that there is sufficient for payouts to unsecureds even after the pension deficit. So it really depends on the CCAA.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we have gone over time. So we are at our third round, members and witnesses. We don't have enough time for a full third round. So as we do, we will break out the time equally. It'll be about 5 and a bit minutes for each of the parties. And I have Ms. Gladue. Okay. Thank you, MP Helen. So Ms. Gladue for the Conservatives will be up for her 5+ minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you again to our witnesses. I want to ask a question, Mr. Powell. One of the mechanisms in C-228 is the ability for a company that has an insolvent fund to transfer money into it without any tax implications, so they can basically top it up and fix it. Now, you had mentioned the Stelco situation, and that what actually helped there to get the pensioners their pension was a revenue flow into their funds. Can you describe what happened there?
It's really complicated, but simplification, the new purchaser wouldn't take over the entire responsibility, but they agreed to put a stream of funding into it. The pensions also were given, if Stelco made over a certain percentage of profit, they were given a stream out of the percentage over, and they were also given a percentage of the land and the facilities, and all that went in. And so that allowed the people running the plan to keep it fairly stable, but they had this new money coming in to build it up and build it up and build it up. If you don't have that source of that money, like in a Sears situation, then again, you have this risk. Who's going to handle the risk? Who's responsible for it? The person running the plan is going to say, I've got no money coming in. I can't take any risk, and it's not going to grow. That's kind of where you run in. And I also want to make the point that, at least as of last week, one of the Stelco pensions has not been annuitized, and it's still under that program, and that's the Stelco salary plan in the Fort Erie Works. And again, they're a member of my organization. So.
And did the Stelco organization see any impact in terms of banks not wanting to lend them credit or any impact like that?
That I don't know. I don't know that.
So let me just talk a little bit about the calendar day coming into force. We had heard, for the benefit of committee members and those that weren't here the other day, that there's a problem with the legislation C-228 picking a calendar day for the coming into force, because there was concern that if there were companies that were going through bankruptcy proceedings, that they'd have to switch measures halfway through. But I've consulted with the legislative clerk, and she's verified that that is not the case, and that the coming into force means that only bankruptcy proceedings that start after the coming into force would be under the new measures. So I just wanted the committee members to know that. I think we also heard that the department officials had said that federally managed pensions had 5 years to get solvent. But Mr. Powell, you had some data that suggested that they've been insolvent for more than 5 years. Can you comment?
Right. This is one of the great misunderstandings of federally regulated pensions. When they say they have 5 years to pay back the deficit, everybody leaps to the conclusion that 5 years after that deficit, the pension is fully funded. That's not what happens. They have 5 years to pay off that particular deficit. And under the federal program, if there's a deficit next year, they take what's owed from the first year, add it to the second year, and get 5 more years. Third year, fourth year, there's a great incentive. And I have actually called the CRA, and they won't let me do that with my taxes.
Yes, well, we don't have enough time tonight to get into all the issues with the CRA. However, so my understanding then of the situation we are facing today is that there have been 10 years of discussions on these bills. Certainly, we came very close with the former Parliament before the election of agreeing that the priority that's suggested here before secured creditors, preferred creditors, and unsecured creditors is a good one. Defined benefit plans are 109% funded on average right now in the federal government, and so that's a good situation. And people have come through a pandemic where they have been extended huge amounts of credit by banks to help them out of their situation or to keep them going on. So it seems to me that with that, we are at a very good time in history to finally protect workers, protect their pensions, and strike that correct balance. So I just want to thank everybody again for all of their input and their ideas, and turn the time back to you, Chair.
Thank you, MP Gladue. And now we are moving to the Liberals. We've got P.S. Fillmore for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks again to the witnesses for joining me in person and virtually. You know, I don't think there's a person in the room or on the call that disagrees with the notion that we need to do better for Canada's pensioners, and that the money that they've put into and the equity that they've put into these companies is their own to withdraw in their retirement. But of course, the money that they pull out is not just the money that they put in. It's also the money being earned by current employees and by the work of the company ongoing while the pensioners are in their retirement. And what we're hearing fairly clearly, I think, is that pensions are super priority for pensioners. Despite how kind of morally connected a pensioner might feel to that, or how right it is that they get their full pension, that or how much bargaining clout it might give them if they're in a super priority position, that doesn't change the kind of the cold hard math of what happens when a company has to pack up entirely and not be able to restructure because of a pension super priority, right? There's like what we feel is right, and then there's the math, and this is kind of the space that we're in here right now. The picture that kind of emerges in our conversation today is that we're hearing from kind of two sides of this. The side perhaps from the Association of Canadian Pension Management that is speaking on behalf of the employers, the companies, the people that are manufacturing and producing goods, and then the people that are speaking on behalf of the pensioners that are kind of at the other end of that machine, receiving what is rightfully theirs. And what we're hearing from the first group is that the machine is put at risk. And so I guess what I would like to, by super pension priority, so I'd like to come to Andrea Bochter and to Ross Dunlop, if I could, to bring it sort of back to practicalities, back to kind of the cold math, I guess, if you will. Right now, the bill puts pensioners in a super priority position over secured and non-secured creditors. Can I ask for your opinion on if we were to make an amendment to the bill that introduced a capped super priority? We've seen this in other jurisdictions. So that would still put the pensioners ahead of secured, unsecured, and so forth, but that it would be capped and it would increase the chances and the runway for companies to restructure. Can I get an opinion on that?
So implementing a super priority of it's similar to the WEPA of a couple of $1,000s per pensioner or per member, or something in that magnitude that can be calculated and reserved for by banks would very likely deal with the risk associated with access to capital that we see. And so certainly in our materials we are supportive of a WEPA-like priority on a per member basis that is not volatile, that is calculable, that is sort of understandable.
Yeah, and I agree with that. If there was a defined cap of a dollar amount per member, then at least the lender would know and would be able to assess that risk. The challenge they have now is they're trying to assess both the assets of the plan and the liabilities of the plan, which are subject to a lot of variation due to yield curve changes. But this would be most helpful for them to assess it and would be a good compromise.
Can I ask you if you were asked to choose between, I didn't make to put you on the spot like this, but if you were asked to choose between that option and say an option that we've heard discussed earlier today, which was to put the pension liability just below the secured creditors, below the banks, is there a preference there in terms of the math and the potential positive outcomes?
Well, I think some of the options that we're proposing actually there isn't a putting one ahead of the other. It's simply keeping that pension fund alive and managing it to a better outcome. Our main point here is that we represent people that manage pension plans on a daily basis. They deal with millions of plan members on an annual basis. And quite honestly, we have complete sympathy for the retiree, and we agree more needs to be done there. But we don't think the super priority is the right approach. And we also don't think that it is an approach that is used hardly anywhere in the world because of its disruption to the investment and financial regimes. So we're simply giving you an alternate options that the government can implement easily without disruption.
Just quickly, the bill's calling for a 3-year coming into force, I believe. We've heard 7 years would be a better number. I've heard 5 bandied about. What would you suppose would be the coming into force term that would have the most positive outcome?
I think we are supportive of 5 to 7 years, and the reasons are these. It's about 2 valuation cycles for a pension plan. It would allow for pension sponsors to renegotiate whatever lending agreements they have, renegotiate collective agreements to the extent they have to in order to be able to continue to access capital on a seamless basis, and then to do the wind up if they need to. It takes 18 months to 24 months to wind up a pension plan for a variety of reasons, and so all of those things taken together, we think 5 to 7 years would give an appropriate amount of time to adjust.
Thank you, and that's the time. P.S. Fillmore, we are going to the block, and MP Sainte-Marie for 5+ minutes.
Merci. Thanks again, Mr. Chair. First, a comment, observation. It's been about 20 years that the House has been debating similar bills to this one in order to better protect pension funds. However, the corporate world, and it's been said many times over the day today, they want more liquidity, so they will voluntarily choose to underfund these pension plans. That liquidity allows them to generate more benefits. And that has to be corrected because those benefits are drawn on the backs of future retirees, and it leads to greater inequities. We're talking about major corporations, blue chip. They're very solid. They're very capable and refined in financial knowledge. And 10%, if 10% of the pension fund has been underfunded, 10%, generally speaking, and we have to intervene. I find it very sympathetic that, yes, we should be doing something, but not that. Now, here's a concrete measure, and we've been debating it for over 10 years in the House, and we're almost there. I mean, it's a compromise. I like the basic principle of this bill, and I congratulate the MP who introduced this bill. And as was saying, my colleague Sophie Châtel, we don't want to make it worse than better. This is why we're studying it in the committee. This is why the industry, the Committee on Industry also studied a similar bill. And we've had a lot of good answers, a lot of good comment, and very informative debate today. It won't be necessarily as bad as people make out. Risk management is risk management. People should be aware of their risk, of course, but they have to properly fund, sufficiently fund their pension plans. My question for Mr. Lapierre then, earlier, you referred, and I didn't react right away on that, but you said, with the current laws, if a company goes bankrupt, the retirees will lose a part of their pensions, but they also lose their health plans. Now, that's a significant point. As Mary Lynn was saying, somebody who's 80 years old, to find a new coverage elsewhere? I don't think so. If they lose their pension plan or part of their pension plan, do they automatically lose their health coverage, the health protection plan? That's a huge risk for retirees and or their successors. Well, thank you for the question. Of course, there's a cut in the pension payout, but for many, many collective agreements, there's a linkage. In some cases, it's negotiated that the health care program continues, but generally they're linked. And the older you get, of course, the less you become insurable, and therefore the risk is higher. If you lose your pension, you probably will lose your health care. At 70, 75, 80 years of age, you cannot find an insurer to cover you at a reasonable cost. And of course, at that stage in life, they're saying, well, I have to prepare for my beneficiaries and my successors. A loss of that kind of revenue is just too hard to take. And this puts them in a very, very stressful situation. Well, thank you for that answer. So if this bill goes forward and allows us to improve the equity treatment towards retirees and those who are subject to pension, health insurance and any other kind of other defined benefits is very good. So we're legislators. Let's legislate, fellow members. Thank you, Member Saint-Marie.
Questioner, and that will be the NDP. We'll have MP Angus to finish off this round in this session.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you for chairing and inviting me, letting me sit in on this fascinating discussion. You know, I remember when the Nortel workers came after they were robbed out of their pension in the United States, and the pension shortfall, $514 million, it was covered by the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, and they came here on Ottawa. And I remember members of every party coming out, and they all went up and they said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. It's like, we're not talking about somebody's funeral here. We're talking about a policy failure. So we're here to talk about whether or not we are going to change policy to protect pensions. So it has been suggested, my Liberal colleagues are suggesting an amendment to this bill that we would put a cap on what the pensioners get in order not to unfairly, leave behind the hedge fund operators or the banks. Mr. Powell, do you think a cap on what pensioners should be allowed to get would be fair? Would you suggest it for this bill? How would you see a cap on what pensioners who are not getting what they deserve out of what they paid into? Would that be a reasonable option for us?
It's just another attempt to take the risk that the employer has agreed to take on willingly, freely, and shift it to the pensioners. It will make the math easier. But the elephant in the room on the math is that these same claims that have been made today were made in 2005 on WEP. If you can't provide data that shows some Armageddon occurred because of WEP, then I don't know how you can accept there will be a problem with this. That's math. Sorry.
I'd like to ask the Canadian Labour Congress, from your experience with your workers, because there's been two suggestions that the Liberals offered. One is a cap, and the other is maybe we find out whether we put them, you know, the pensioner, for example, the 70-year-old man that I know who went back to work on the drills underground, his rights compared to the banks. What would be a reasonable thing? The banks made $49.7 billion in Canada last year. Should the pensioner be ahead of the bank or behind the bank? Would that be a reasonable amendment?
Yeah, no, we're here to say that this needs to be a super priority. And if you put a cap or it's like, you know, a partial super priority, the reality is that when you're investing in your pension, you're not investing in your pension with the, but I hope I get most of it. You're investing in your pension, expecting your pension to be at that level. And let's just talk about the impact that's going to have on supposedly nobody's going to be able to borrow money ever again. But like, you know, banks take into consideration so many, you know, in terms of the risk that is associated with that. And so the ability to, you know, for pensioners to demand their full value of their pension may absolutely be part of that discussion, but it's not going to be the only factor. And so commercial creditors like banks and financial institutions can take steps to protect their investment against the risk of default. They can, you know, expect companies to fully fund their pension benefit plans. I think that's not a bad thing. They can require increased disclosure about the funded status of their pension plans, and that's not a bad thing. The reality is, when we look at interest rates over time, lenders still keep lending because they're in the, you know, the business of lending, and that's how they make their profit. So there's no evidence to show that they're suddenly going to pull all of that, because the reality is they need to stay in business as well. And so workers need to be at the top of that list so that they are not the ones taking on the risk when others are better able to take the risk.
Well, I want to end with you. You talked about the Armageddon scenario that's been brought for us, and my God, I was so shocked when I learned our discussion might cause all these defined pension plans to just wind up and disappear. I've watched defined pension plans disappear in my region for years. I've never seen one of those corporations go under. They just didn't want to pay into it anymore. Do you think that us protecting pensions from people who've had their pensions lost, do you see this? It's a possibility that even us discussing this is going to make them all run out and wind up the pension, so this generation of workers is going to be left high and dry? Is that a reasonable scenario that's being put forward here?
Again, don't know, but I would say that if you use the term wind up, that means to wind up a pension on an ongoing, if you're an ongoing business, you have to fully fund it, which is not necessarily a bad thing before you wind it up. So, I mean, the worst case. And the other thing is, when you talk about the 1.4 million, whatever it is, those are the active employees. There's probably 4 to 5 million already retired people, depending on these benefits, who are losing out. I can say from my experience, I work for General Motors of Canada. Last AV we had 600 to 700 actives in the pension plan, 6,000 to 7,000 retirees. So when you look at that 1.2 or 1.3 million, those are just the people that are actively working. It doesn't, nobody keeps track. This is another ageism thing in government. Nobody keeps track of pensioners. StatsCan doesn't, nobody does. But I don't think the Armageddon is, in my mind, not, it's never been proven. It's been threatened, it's been forecast, but it's never happened.
Mr. Palin, thank you, MP Angus. And on behalf of the Finance Committee, we want to thank our expert witnesses for your testimony, for the many questions that you answered. Thank you. And that will conclude our meeting. We're adjourned, members.